Hello everyone, and welcome back to the most special episode of Commander in General to date. Because we did it, guys! We reached 1,000 subscribers, and honestly, it's nuts. 7 months ago, when I started making videos again, I wasn't sure if there was going to be any interest at all, and while I did set myself the goal of reaching 1,000, I did not think it was going to happen this quick. But the support has been awesome. The conversation and the comments and the community we're starting here, I think, is the beginning of something really, really cool. So thank you all so much for the support. I'm probably going to be slowing down a little bit here going into the holiday season, especially since the release of sets is slowing down a little bit, but who knows what I'll cook up in the meantime. You guys can chime in with any ideas you may have down in the comments, but for today, we celebrate. I wasn't exactly sure what we should do to celebrate, and I mulled over a couple ideas, but what I settled on was that today, I'm going to be going over not just one, not two, not three, but all 25 of my current commander decks. So this is going to be a long one, and it's not going to be as snappy as a lot of my other commander videos. This one's going to be a little bit more conversational, a little bit more free flow, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I also think that since I'm constantly brewing something up, building decks and taking them apart, that going forward this is going to be a pretty good timestamp of where I was at the time and what I was playing. Some of these decks you might have seen in videos before, so I'll try to be brief about those ones, but I'll let you know when we come across one of them in case you want to go check out the full video. But as for this video, if you like it, I would very much appreciate if you dropped a like and a comment. If you're new, it'd be awesome if you hit that sub button, the bell button, and join the channel as we continue to grow and hit our next milestone. We brew decks here, do little silly skits, silly voices. It's fun, I think. But here's just a little taste.
She's the scowling thrower, the blood sower, the ass mower.
To play dirtier than a greased up pig in the muck and steal your right hand 6-shooter and have his eyes popping out like a rattlesnake bite before high noon. But what's this? Another form? Ganon, Final Evil. The infamous Cruel Claw. Are you ready for the most metal deck that you're scrawny no good blue playing caster? Do you pay the one asking?
So if any of that bullshit seems your speed, consider sticking around. Also, I don't have a deck list for all of these decks, so don't bother asking. Maybe I'll get to it eventually. I don't know. But some of these decks are quite old and need a little bit of updating anyways, but I will link my Architect account in the description. Not all of my decks are on there, and some of them are just ideas for the moment. You can follow me there if you'd like. And if you want a full deck tech on any of those, let me know and maybe I can make it happen. And I guess while I'm shilling here, you can also follow me on TikTok at Commander in General, without the L, because apparently the name is one letter too long. And speaking of too long, without further ado, strap in and let's get started with our first deck. Vial Smasher and Gilanra. Vial Smasher the Fierce is a 3-mana, 2/3 legendary creature goblin berserker that says whenever you cast your first spell each turn, Vial Smasher the Fierce deals damage equal to that spell's converted mana cost to an opponent chosen at random. Usually I do this by rolling a dice, and then it also has partner. So I'm partnering with Gilanra, Caller of Wirewood, who is a 1/2 elf druid that says tap for 1 green mana. When you spend this mana to cast a spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater, draw a card. So we can see how these work well in tandem. So the main strategy of this deck is to create a large amount of mana that we can dump into X spells and throw around a bunch of damage with Vial Smasher. Vial Smasher is one of my favorite commanders of all time, so this deck has taken many forms over the years. It used to be a flash themed deck that focused on playing every turn and then taking extra turns. So we've got lots of really big mana cards like Zendikar Resurgent, Nyx Bloom Ancient to triple our mana, and then Magus of the Candelabra and Umbral Mantle to do some tapping and untapping of lands. It also obviously plays lots of X spells because on the stack, those X spells have huge mana costs and we get to throw around a bunch of damage. So we've got some of these Hydras like Goldvein Hydra and a really cool one, Capricopian. Capricopian is like maybe my favorite Hydra because whoever it's attacking can pay 2 mana to make it bigger and send it at somebody else. So it becomes this game of just like, no, I don't want to get hit. No, I don't want to get hit. And you're just like throwing it around a lot. It's really cool. It also plays some other big X spells to throw throw around a bunch of damage like Lavalanche, Jaya's Immolating Inferno, Torment of Hailfire, and then for a real cheesy win in there, we've also got Helix Pinnacle, which is an enchantment that has Shroud. It's 1 mana, and you can pay X to put X amount of counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more counters on it, you win the game. And lastly, some other kind of important cool cards for this deck are Vedalken Orrery. So this isn't the version of this deck that totally prioritizes flash anymore. I'm not trying to play on everybody's turn necessarily, but Vedalken Orrery does let you do that, so it's really one of the better cards in the deck. Karavik the Merciless I think is pretty awesome because then we just get to throw some more damage around. Allure of the Unknown I thought was like really smart tech in this deck, if I'm tooting my own horn here, because it says reveal the top 6 cards of your library. An opponent exiles a non-land card from among them, then you may put the rest into your hand. That opponent may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. The thing about them getting to cast one of these cards for free is quite often these cards are going to have X in the cost, and if they do, then they are going to have to cast it for X is 0, which I thought was kind of cool. And then we just get to draw 5 cards. And then I don't have them in here yet, but I thought the Lord of Pain from Duskmourn would be a really good addition to this deck. So yeah, that's my Vial Smasher and Gilanra deck. My next deck is Kwain Itinerant Meddler. Kwain is a very nice, small, 2-mana, 1/3 rabbit wizard, whose text box reads, each player may draw a card. Then each player who drew a card this way gains 1 life. If you ask me what kind of deck this was, I would say it's a group hug deck. But if you ask me on a deeper level, I would say it's secretly a mill deck with loads of cheesy win cons. So we have a lot of these symmetrical card draw effects like Folio of Fancies, Well of Ideas, Prosperity, Temple Bell, so everybody's getting to draw a bunch of extra cards every turn, filling up their hands but also hopefully having to discard some. We've got a little bit of untapped synergy to make use of Kwain and other cards similar to him like Arcanus the Omnipotent, so we can play cards like Refocus, Vizier of the Tumbling Sands to untap them and draw even more cards. We have a few cards in there just to benefit off us drawing cards like Toothy, Imaginary Friend, Chasm Skulker, and Body of Knowledge. And then we've got some real cheesy win cons. We've got Psychosis Crawler to just kill people off drawing cards, Laboratory Maniac if we draw ourselves out, combos like Traumatize with Fraying Sanity to just mill somebody of their entire deck, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, sort of has that Laboratory Maniac thing going on, and we've got Approach of the Second Sun, because we're going to very quickly be able to draw that again and then win the game. And lastly, there's just a few Pillow Fort elements here, because we are a group hug deck, we're not going to be playing a ton of these creatures that'll protect us, so I am playing Glacial Chasm in this deck, and then cards like Propaganda. But yeah, this is a very fun deck. It's a really good one to bring out with new people who are playing, and it's especially fun against people who don't know the secret about it yet. So let's move far away from group hug and go to one of my most competitive decks here. This is Immodane, the Pyro Hammer, and this is a burn deck. So Immodane is 4 mana for a legendary creature human knight. They're a 4/4, and their text box says whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control that targets only a single creature deals damage to that creature, Immodane deals that much damage to each opponent. Wow. This is kind of my try-hard deck. As long as you can keep Immodane alive, you will be throwing around a ridiculous amount of damage with these burn spells. You generally wouldn't play anywhere else otherwise, which is my favorite kind of deck. So we're playing efficient, single-target damage spells like Seismic Strike, Spitting Earth, Unholy Heat, Weight of Spires, and then we play these damage multipliers like Soulfeme, Mayhem Dominus, and Fiery Emancipation, so getting to double and triple that damage we're doing. There's also a cool thing that happens here if you are doubling or tripling your damage, because there's technically 2 instances of damage going on here. The first, and I believe this is how this works, is that you'll be doing damage to their creature. So that damage is going to get doubled or tripled. And then Immodane is going to do that damage to each opponent. So that's actually going to happen again. So this thing just goes crazy very, very quickly. We want to be able to get there pretty quick, so we're playing some big mana. We're playing Descent into Avernus. I feel like everybody's playing Descent into Avernus these days. It's kind of a cool card because it really accelerates the game if you want to get a bunch of games in. Braid of Fire, you just have to be able to use that mana at instant speed. And then Mana Geyser, of course. We also want to be playing some pretty efficient X spells that deal damage to one creature. For this reason, I like Mishra's Command and Ferrous's Intervention because we get to double that damage there, so very efficient. And yeah, that's my Immodane red burn deck. Now moving on to a creature that I don't know if I've ever pronounced correctly, Captain Nagthrod. Let's pretend I said that right. Captain is a 5-mana horror pirate who's a 3/6 that says, horrors you control have menace. Already very good. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. At the beginning of your end step, choose target artifact or creature in an opponent's graveyard that was put there from their library this turn. And then you just get to put it onto the battlefield under your control. This is a horror/steal deck. I love decks that steal stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of the Magic I play these days is over webcam, and it's just too difficult to track these kind of decks, so I don't get to play this one as often as I would like, but it's always tons of fun to break out when I'm playing Magic in person. It's loaded with tons of horrors that mill and steal and have lots of other cool effects. The horror tribe itself has just like some really awesome weird abilities. Like Psionic Ritual is a 6-mana sorcery that has Replicate. It says tap an untapped horror you control, and then when you cast the spell, copy it for each time you paid its Replicate cost. You may choose new targets for each copy. And then we exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast that copy without paying its mana cost. And then you exile Psionic Ritual. Very, very cool. A card that obviously only works in horror decks, so I love playing it here. Some other really cool ones are Elder Brain, which you just get to exile somebody's hand and then play those cards. Aboleth Spawn lets us steal ETB triggers and you can play it at flash speed. Then Endless Evil lets us make copies of a creature, and then when that creature dies, if it was a horror, we get to return this to our hand. And then a lot of horrors already have this mill theme that our commander cares about, so I am playing Nemesis of Reason, Consuming Aberration. Then I also am playing Brewvac here to double that amount of cards. Next deck is Mr.House, President and CEO. He's a 3-mana 0/4 legendary artifact creature human. The artifact creature is important. Their text box reads, whenever you roll a 4 or higher, create a 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. If you rolled a 6 or higher, instead create that token and a treasure token. And then we can pay 4 and then tap him and roll a 6-sided die plus an additional 6-sided die for each mana from a treasure spent to activate this ability. So if we have 4 treasures and we use all 4 of them, we can roll a grand total of 5 dice at a time. This quickly became one of my favorite decks of all time. I think the flavor, the function, the play pattern of this deck really amount to something very fun, strong, and special. It basically revolves around trying to roll as many dice as you can to make a ton of treasures and robots and deal hopefully lots of damage along the way. So to roll a bunch of dice and make a bunch of treasure, we're going to play cards like Delina Wild Mage. Vexing Puzzle Box I think is a really cool one. I love playing Comet Stellar Pup here. Ancient Copper Dragon is awesome, or any of the ancient dragons that fit in these colors. I play a few cards that buff our robots up if we want, like Cyberman Squadron, Illustrious Wanderglyph, Cyberman Patrol, and then we're going to try and get a bunch of ETB damage with all of our artifacts entering and leaving the battlefield with Impact Tremors, Ingenious Artillerist, Ferrous, God of the Forge, and Reckless Fireweaver. And being that we're the house has always got to win, so we gotta fix those dice. So we're gonna play Will, Blade of the Frontiers, and Barbarian class to really make sure we're getting the rolls that we want. If you want to check out this deck, I do have a deck tech for Mr.House on my channel, and I think it's really cool. It's really good. I think it's actually the top video on my channel at this moment. So yeah, go check that one out. This next one is a little bit special to me because this was my first deck back on this channel 7 months ago. It's the Celestial Toymaker. This is my Decisions deck. Celestial Toymaker is a 3-mana 2/4 legendary creature rogue artificer that says, whenever the Celestial Toymaker attacks, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile any number of them in a face-down pile and the rest in a face-up pile. Defending player chooses one of those piles, put that pile into your hand. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses 2 life for each spell or ability that cause 1 or more players to guess or to group cards or permanents into a pile this turn. I love interaction, and this deck is 100% interaction, but maybe not in the way you're used to thinking about it. This deck focuses on making people group your cards or play little guessing games, and then you get to deal some damage based on how many times you do that. And then we finish out this game with some big ol' sphinxes. So we have some cards for guessing and grouping here, like Brilliant Ultimatum, Do or Die, Jace, Architect of Thought, Boneyard Parlay. Hangman is obviously an uncard here, but I put it in. I think it's fun. The 7th Doctor works super well. Another card here is Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, and this was actually kind of an earlier version of this deck that I had before the Celestial Toymaker came out. I really wanted to just make people make a bunch of these decisions. And then Golem Scheming Guide is another kind of fun one here. And then, like I said, we want to end this game out with some Sphinxes. They're nice, big creatures. They have flying, and often their ETB abilities will make people choose or group cards. So we have Conundrum Sphinx. Unesh is probably like the best Sphinx to have here because it gives all of your other Sphinxes an extra ETB there. We have Magister Sphinx, and then I have a little bit of ETB synergy for these guys with cards like Conjurer's Closet to just make sure we're getting more of these ETBs. Next is my Tana and Jeska deck. So Tana the Bloodsower is a 4-mana 2/2 legendary creature elf druid with trample that reads, whenever Tana the Bloodsower deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens. They also have Partner, which is where Jeska comes in. Jeska is a 3-mana planeswalker that has Partner and can be your commander. When Jeska enters the battlefield, they enter with loyalty on it equal to each time you've cast a commander from the command zone this game. And then they have 2 abilities. For 0, we can choose target creature. Until your next turn, if that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage to that player instead. Jeska does have another ability, which I never end up using, that says -X. Jeska Thrice Reborn deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. Really, I just use her for that 0 ability to buff up Tana for the turn so we can get a ton of sapperlings. So yeah, this is another one of my longest lasting commanders. It was formerly paired with Kedis, but I ended up switching to Jeska just because that triple damage is so worth it. This is a cool deck because it's a deck that can go tall with Tana or a deck that can go wide with sapperlings, which also makes you feel pretty safe to swing out with Tana every turn when you can have those other creatures to leave back. And this is often an issue with Voltron decks, is they don't leave up a ton of blockers. So we're going to want to make Tana unblockable, so we're playing a lot of these cards like Prowler's Helm, Rogue's Passage, stuff like that to make sure that we're landing those hits. Luckily, Tana already has Trample, so that's very useful. We have Dragon's Rage, Mishra's Command, and Shiv's Embrace. I think Dragon Rage specifically is really cool for when we have one creature that we want to buff up, but we've also got all these other creatures attacking, and it often is good to use on Tana, but you know, you can, if you want to, do it on one of the sapperlings that isn't getting blocked. That's totally an option as well. Shiv's Embrace makes her harder to block, and then you also get that dragon buffing again if you have some extra mana. And then we want a few other creatures that can take these Voltron elements on them as well, it's to make use of them. So one I really like is Kranko Tin Street Kingpin, who as they get bigger makes more and more goblins. And then we obviously want more tokens, so we can play these token doublers like Parallel Lives. And then we just want a few ways to buff up these tokens if we want. So I like playing Hamara, Human Ascendant, who can give them all +2/+2 and fire breathing. Coat of Arms is an older but very classic buffer for token strategies. And then Dynacharge is one that can give a last minute buff to Tana, or we can play that Overcharge and give it to all of our sapperlings and just swing out. Moving on to our next deck, we have General Ferrous Rockerick. I do technically have a deck tech for this deck, but I doubt it's very good, and I made it, I think it was actually a deck tech I made when this channel had a different name, but yeah, that does exist on my channel, so you can go check that out if you want. They are a 3-mana 3/1 human soldier that have Hexproof from Monocolored, which is pretty unique, and their other ability says whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. That's a pretty big token just for casting a multicolored spell. So this is a deck that definitely needs an update. Haven't given it some TLC in a while, but the idea is basically that you want to play lots of multicolored cards, namely ones that help your tokens and other creatures attack better. I want to redo this deck with the restriction that every card needs to be multicolored. I think that'd be really fun. But like I said, the golems this deck makes are huge for how easily they are to make. So there is also some golem synergy here, and I think even the suboptimal version of this deck that I have is still pretty strong, and it's fun to play. Just kind of a unique card in this deck is Urza's Filter, which lets us cast multicolored cards for cheaper. We have lots of cool multicolored creatures that match our playstyle, like Eris, God of Victory, Argus Kos, Wojak Veteran, Tajik, Blade of the Legion. Man, I used to love Tajik. I should make another Tajik deck. Belborka, Blade Historian, Battlefire Liege, and Noblesse of War. We've got a few combat tricks, / cards that give us multiple combats, like Master Warcraft. Chance for Glory is, you know, you're really swinging for the fences when you play Chance of Glory. Got Waves of Aggression, and Aurelia the War Leader. And then here we have some sort of token artifacts matter / golems matter cards here. Akiri Lineslinger is gonna profit off of all of those extra artifacts that we're gonna have. Mondrak Glory Dominus is gonna give us even more of those guys. Alabu is really awesome whenever we have a bunch of artifact creatures. Sensor Splicer is part of this cycle that actually not only makes a golem, but then gives them a keyword. So there actually is more of these types of cards. Anointed Procession, obviously, we want more of those tokens. And that is my general Ferrous Multicolored Matters deck. Beamtown Bullies. I wrestled with if I was even gonna put this deck in here, but here we go. Beamtown Bullies is a 4-mana 4/4 Ogre Devil Warrior. I think it's because it's supposed to be kind of representing multiple people here. Has Vigilance, Haste, and you can tap it, and target opponent whose turn it is puts target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under their control. It gains haste, goad it, and at the beginning of the next end step, exile it. Now this deck I kind of made as a challenge when one of my friends and I were joking, and they were talking about Jund Group Hug and how like nobody builds Jund Group Hug, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. And let me preface with, this deck is bad. It hugs, it is a group hug deck. And that's just about it. It just hugs. It doesn't really have a way to win, and that wasn't really my goal. But I don't think this deck is gonna last long, if I'm being honest. But yeah, this deck aims to give people cards with cards like Rites of Flourishing, Howling Mines. It wants to give people mana with Avatar of Growth, Zerta Ancient, Mana Flare, Victory Chime. This is kind of a pet card of mine. Helm of Awakening. To make stuff cheaper, we want to give people creatures and buffs, cards like the Hunted Cycle that are usually very efficiently costed creatures but give your opponent something. Hunted Wumpus is one of my favorite hunted cards. Also just playing a Wumpus. Who doesn't want to play a Wumpus? Boldwire Heavyweights is a crazy card. Life of the Party, Rite of the Raging Storm is also a pet card of mine in these group sluggy styles. Wild Evocation, and Avatar of Slaughter. Just make everything have double strike, make everything have to attack, cause chaos. And then we want a few ways to bring stuff back from our graveyard, like Hell's Caretaker and Tempt with Immortality. Like I said, not a good deck, but there it is. The Jolly Balloon Man is my most recent deck tech at this point, so if you haven't seen it, it's over here. There's a pretty cool sketch at the beginning, I think, so check that out.
Oh, Timmy.
How do you know my name?
So this is from Duskmourn. Jolly Balloon Man is a 3-mana 1/4 legendary creature, human, clown, that has haste. His ability says you can pay 1 and tap it and create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other colors and types. It has flying and haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, and you may only activate this as a sorcery. So this is a toolbox deck, ETB/LTB deck, which I think is pretty cool for these colors. Having the balloons is pretty unique as well, although one of the strongest cards in this deck and many other decks is Dockside Extortionist, which we all know was banned recently. I don't usually play Dockside, but in this deck, how could you not? So yeah, toolbox, we want a ramp with cards like Solemn Simulacrum that we can replicate. Got some removal with cards like Meteor Golem and Cathar Commando. Then you can multiply all these triggers with cards like Panharmonicon, Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor, Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, and once again, just multiplying these effects, making clones. We have Kiki Jiki, who's very similar to the Jolly Balloon Man. Ephemerate to reactivate those ETBs. Godric, Soul Kindler to make copies of these guys. And then an absolutely absurd card, Another Round, who will just bounce things as many times as you want. Next up is Galadriel. Yeah, I'm working on my Elvish pronunciation. Light of Valinor, who is a 5-mana 3/3 elf noble with an ability that says Alliance. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. And you have 3 options here. You can add 3 green mana, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, or scry 2, then draw a card. So my wife used to play Magic with me. Yeah, I know, sad sentence. And she played a few too many games that she didn't enjoy and kind of swore off the game for a long time. But slowly over time, more people around us got into the game and they came out with more and more sets, and I slowly broke her down. And the straw that broke the camel's back was the Lord of the Rings set. My wife is a huge Lord of the Rings fan. She has this huge back tattoo of the Tree of Gondor on her back. So while I really don't like playing elves, I think them and goblins are definitely the 2 easiest ways is to get into playing Magic in general. All the cards are very self-sufficient, but build together to something bigger, so it's pretty perfect for a new player. So this isn't really my deck, but you know, it wants to play a critical amount of elves. So we have obviously the Llanowar elves, Priest of Titania, Canopy Tactician, Izuri, Renegade Leader, Circle of Dreams Druid, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this, but Galadriel Ambush, which is an instant that makes a bunch of elf warriors. We've got some card draw in here, obviously. The card draw I was trying to go for was options that draw you cards based on how many creatures that you have. So Inspiring Call and Shamanic Revelation were good options there. And then for game enders, I wanted to keep it really classic. So we have Craterhoof Behemoth, Overrun, and Overwhelming Stampede. And actually, her first time playing this deck, she ended up winning the game, so that was really awesome. You know, like I said, I don't love Elf Ball, but it's perfect for new players. Next up is
Eris, Roar of the Storm.
If you haven't seen it yet, I do have a deck tech for this deck up on my channel, and I spent a really long time on the intro, so please go check that out. Eris is a whopping 10 mana for a 4/4 elemental warlock that reads, this spell costs 2 less for each different mana value among instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So we are going to want to fill our graveyard so that we're not having to pay that whole 10 mana for them. And then they have Flying, Prowess, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 4/4 red dragon elemental creature token with Flying and Prowess. So those are some gigantic creatures. So this deck wants to cast multiple spells a turn to make absolutely huge tokens with Prowess, and then play a few more spells to buff them up and attack all of your friends. So I wanted to make even more tokens in this deck with cards like Murmuring Mystic, Octavia Living Thesis. Wanted to cast multiple spells a turn with cards that have like Cascade and give a rebound like Ojur. Wanted to double up on these triggers with cards like Veyrin, Voice of Duality, who doubles these triggers. Play lots of these cantrips that fill your graveyard. And then since we're going to be playing a lot of these instant sorceries anyways, cards like Ral, Storm Conduit that ping people for playing these cards are pretty cool as well. And one last notable card in this deck is Energy Tap, which we can play to tap our commander for a whole 10 mana, which is pretty sweet. Now, while I do really like that Izzet deck, I think I ended up liking this next Izzet deck a little bit more, just a little bit easier to pull off. It's Bria, Riptide Rogue. Once again, another deck tech for this one up on my channel.
Forget your tall tales of Eldrazi and Bolas, and trade them all in for a story from the forest.
Please go check that one out. Bria Riptide Rogue is a 4-mana, 3/3 legendary creature otter rogue with Prowess, and it gives other creatures you control Prowess as well, so already very strong. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So it really does everything you want all just on the one card. So like I said, this one is a little bit similar to the last one that I just went over, but this deck wants more in the way of tokens. And then we'll buff them up with Prowess from our commander, and then make some big unblockable ones. So we'll get tokens through cards like Young Peasy, you know, the Pyromancer, Talrand, Sky Summoner, Murmuring Mystic, and Dika, Fractal Theorist to really just fill our board. We're going to play some cantrips like Brainstorm, Big Score, Crimson Wisps. These are going to be the thing that activates our Prowess. And then we've also got some combat tricks like Crash Through, Dynacharge like we had in our Tana deck, Relentless Assault, and I think Twinferno is pretty awesome as well. So yeah, if you want the full deck tech, up on the channel. Another recent deck tech, we have Herigast, Erupting Hellkite, who is a 9-mana, 6/6 Eldrazi dragon. It's pretty strange. And it has an emerge cost for 8. Now, if you don't remember what emerge does, it says, you may cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost, reduced by that creature's mana value. So we're essentially sacking something to make this creature cheaper. It says, whenever you cast this spell, you may exile your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. That's something you can do if you want. It also has flying, and each creature spell you cast has Emerge. The Emerge cost is equal to its mana cost. So another really cool play pattern for a red deck. This deck wants to cheat out cards with big mana costs and ETB abilities, and then sacrifice them to get even bigger ETB abilities. So we got these creatures with big ETB abilities like Cityscape Leveler, Combustible Gear Hulk, Cranko Buzz Crusher, and Terror of the Peaks. And then we want to make clones of those that we can sacrifice to play more creatures, like Godpharaoh's Gift, Mirror March, Skitterbeam Battalion. And when you make a token copy of a creature, it does have that mana cost, which is a distinction from if you make a regular token, like a squirrel token or a goblin token, something like that. And then lastly, we just play cards that want to die anyways, like Suchi Cave Guard, which will give us a bunch of mana when it dies. Rekindling Phoenix doesn't care if it dies because it's just going to come right back. And then Emrakul's Hatcher, these cards that give you a bunch of spawns or other things that'll give you mana. Next up is my Link Hero of Time deck. So this is a Legend of Zelda theme deck based around Galea. Galea, Kindler of Hope, is a 4-mana, 4/4 elf knight creature with vigilance that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast or unequipment spells from the top of your library. When you cast an equipment this way, it gains, when this equipment enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. So I thought this fit really well with the theme of Link and what they want to do. You can play all that Legend of Zelda flavored equipment, and then there's also tons of flavored creatures and places and moments and references from the series. I just jammed as much as I could in this deck, and the whole deck tech is themed around Legend of Zelda. If you like Legend of Zelda, go check that one out. So we wanted some Voltron and Voltron elements here, like the Master Sword, of course, which I made Sword of Kuldra. The Great Deku Tree was Kodama of the West Tree. The Magic Armor from Twilight Princess was Mantle of the Ancients. Had Mask of Truth was actually Mask of Memory. Goron Bracelet was Belt of Giant Strength. I have maybe way too many examples here, but I wanted other creatures that work well with the equipment. So we've got Link, Kokiri Novice, who was Kellen the Kid. Zelda, Hyrule Luminary, who was Danitha, New Benalia's Light. I wanted to have Ganondorf in there, so he's Rafik of the Many. So yeah, I would do this again, but it took me a really long time. I've been planning for a long time to do a Shovel Knight themed deck, and I am excited to do that, but I want to do it right. But I want to have like pixel art borders and a special font and stuff, and I want to be able to put it somewhere where people can download it, because I know with this deck, people really wanted to download it, and there is most of the pictures on my architect, but I do need to go back and update that. Another deck tech I had here was for...
That'd be none other than the baddest hombre this side of the multiverse, Gonti, Canny Inquisitor.
The whole deck tech is sort of like Western themed, so definitely check that out. Gonti is a 5-mana, 5/5 Aetherborn rogue that says spells you cast and don't own cost 1 less to cast. He also says whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library. Then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. The logline of this deck was to steal cards in any capacity and from anywhere. So I built in cards that steal from the graveyard, from the top of your library, from inside the library, and from their hand. So you can take cards from the graveyard with cards like Tasha, the Witch Queen, play stuff from their library with cards like Villainous Wealth, which is one of my favorite cards ever, Knowledge Exploitation, Kaido Shizuki, play cards from the top of their library with Brain Stealer Dragon and Fallen Shinobi. And then we also wanted a bunch of these little guys that are actually going to proc Gonti's ability. So I have this section called Little Guys that are hard to block. So we have Cephalid Face Taker, Dimir Infiltrator, Grima, Saruman's Footman, Vashta Narada, cards like that. I wanted to have a few ways to sacrifice creatures, because if we're taking creatures, we also want the ability to get rid of them and gain benefits off of them. So I had Nasty End, Vampiric Rites, and Corrupted Conviction. And then we want to reduce the cost for paying for all these cards that we're stealing. So Doc Airlock, Grizzled Genius is a really awesome one. And then Honest Rutstein as well. All right, moving on to Marvo, Deep Sea Operative, or as I always call him, Marvo. Octodude. Marvo is a 5-mana 1/8 octopus rogue, which, like, starting off there, dope. Looking at like this octopus under the water, he's grabbing a knife. I'm afraid of that. But he's also just such a weird, fun commander. This is definitely one of my favorites in recent times. His text box reads, when Marvo Deep Operative attacks, clash with defending player. Now, clash is a really old mechanic. It says each clashing player reveals the top of their library and then puts that card on the top or bottom. A player wins if their card had a higher mana value. Whenever we win a clash, we draw a card, then we may cast a spell from our hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. Jesus. Yeah, so this is one of those decks that I think is a really dumb idea for a deck, so you spend way too much time thinking about it and tuning it, and by the end, you've made it too strong, kinda. So the point of this deck is to clash with Marvo, or through other means, and then cheat out cards that have alternative casting costs, so that we always win the clashes, but these cards don't also get stuck in our hand early game. So some of these cards with alternative casting costs are cards like Price of Fame, one with the Multiverse, Curtain's Call, and then we also want to be maximizing the amount of times that we get to activate Marvo. So one of the ways we do this is with clones that can clone legendary creatures like Quantum Misalignment, Sakashima, Spark Double. We want to obviously put in some cards that clash, like Research the Deep, Scattering Stroke, and Pulling Teeth, which once again, Pulling Teeth, that art is yee. And then a great way of getting extra activations is just taking extra turns. So we've also got Temporal Mastery, Alrund's Epiphany, and Temporal Trespass, all extra turn spells that have these alternative casting costs. And then it's always good if we can control what the top card of our library is. It's not as important because we can actually just cast the spells for free from our hand, but we do need to know what our top card is to win those clashes. So I'm playing Palantir of Orthonk, Doom Whisperer, and Field of Dreams is one that I think is really cool, especially for that much mana. So my full Marvo deck tech is up on my channel as well, so if you want, you can go check that out. Next is Forge Neverwinter Charlatan. Forge is a 4-mana 2/4 legendary creature, human rogue. He has Menace, Ward, sacrifice a creature, so somebody tries to target him, they have to sacrifice a creature to pay the ward cost. He also says Forge Neverwinter Charlatan gets +2/+0 for each treasure we control. So we know we're going to want a few treasures here. And then whenever one or more players sacrifice one or more creatures, you create a tapped treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. Forge is a greedy little fella, so naturally he wants a bunch of treasures. So the way I wanted to use the treasures in this deck was to make it part of like a Voltron kind of sub-theme, and then also have that sacrifice sub-theme. So we make treasures with cards like Revel in Riches, Lich Knight's Conquest, Blood Money, make people sacrifice creatures with cards like Braids, Arisen Nightmare, Altar's Reap, and the Meathook Massacre. And we also want a few of these creatures that we can recur and make come back, like Bloodghast or Carrier Thrall. Then the last category here is just stuff to buff Forge up a little bit. So I like Nettle Cyst, because then you get to double up on the stats you're getting from all those treasures. And then Whisper Silk Cloak to make them unblockable, and some more unblockable stuff, you know I like that. I don't play a lot of black decks, especially not a lot of mono black decks, so I felt like this was a cool way to get me into it. Next is Tawnos the Toymaker, Beast and Birds. Tawnos is a 5-mana 3/5 legendary creature human artificer, and his text box is pretty simple. It reads, whenever you cast a beast or a bird creature spell, you may copy it, except a copy is an artifact in addition to its other types. I was originally just building this deck as one that just built a lot of birds and a lot of beasts, namely because I've always wanted a justifiable place to play the card Fable of Wolf and Owl. I've just always thought it was really cool, has really nice art. But as I was building this deck, I started to notice a sub-theme growing, and after a while it slowly gained this secret infect theme that also incorporates a few proliferate elements. So just starting off with some good beasts and birds. The Ragtusks is obviously super valuable. You're going to gain a bunch of life. You also get some 3/3s when it dies. Pretty sweet. Phyrexian Ingester is an awesome one because we actually get like basically 2 removal spells on this creature, plus then our creature gets bigger. Elder Gargaroth is another cool like multimodal creature. It's a 5-mana 6/6 Vigilance, Reach, Trample to start, and then whenever it attacks or blocks, we get to make another 3/3 beast creature token, gain a little bit of life, or draw a card. Armored Scrap Gorger is cool because then we kind of get like a mana dork that we get to double up on. Birds of Paradise, once again, getting double up our mana. And having 2 Thunderfoot Baeloths makes our whole board gigantic. But then in the Infect/Toxic theme, we've got Tainted Observer, who has both the Toxic keyword and can also proliferate. Tezzeret's Gambit, which can let us proliferate. Rolesk, same thing. Thrumming Bird is a bird that will let us proliferate whenever we hit, so great to have more than one of those. Contaminated Grafter, once again, has that Toxic and proliferate on it, plus a little extra. And this one is not a beast or a bird, but Phyrexian Swarmlord is a 6-mana 4/4 Phyrexian insect horror with infect. At the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 green Phyrexian insect creature token with infect for each poison counter your opponents have. So we just get to build a bunch of these blockers and really go deep on that infect once we get this guy out. So yeah, another deck that kind of has a little bit of a surprise once you start playing. Now, similar to how Forge was getting me to play these black decks that I don't usually play, Ragga Dragga was the commander that got me to play Elf Ball. So Ragga Dragga Gorgut's Boss is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary creature, human boar. He reads, each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2. So all those mana dorks are going to get buffed up. And then whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it. So that way we don't have to waste our creatures that give us mana attacking. You get the best of both worlds. And then finally, whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 or more mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature. It gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. So like I said, Ragga Dragga is an elf deck that is more my speed. This is a really sink or swim deck though, because all the ramp I'm playing is in the form of creatures, so this deck is really susceptible to board wipes. But the idea is that if you want to put out tons of dorks that give you mana, then ramp to these giant spells that buff up all your small guys, and then swing out for a ton of damage. So I'm playing mana dorks like Birds of Paradise, Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, Awaken the Woods, and Priest of Titania. We want all those big buffs that you know to buff our board of creatures like Endray's Forerunners, Craterhoof Behemoth, and God Eternal Ronus is a really cool one. We want this card draw for playing small creatures, so I like things like Guardian Project and Soul of the Harvest, so we can just kind of keep that engine going, especially because if we have a mitt full of really small creatures, we could just lay our whole hand out in one turn. And because all of my ramp isn't in artifacts, it's in creatures, I like playing stuff like Creeping Corrosion and just destroying all artifacts that everybody else has. So if you don't like elves but want something of that playstyle, try this one out. I think you'll like it. Next up is Graaz. Graaz Unstoppable Juggernaut is an 8-mana 7/5 Juggernaut. His text box reads, Juggernauts you control attack each turn if able. Juggernauts you control can't be blocked by walls. So if your friend whips out his wall deck, you know what to do. And the last thing it says is other creatures you control have base power and toughness 5/3 and are Juggernauts in addition to their other types. So once again, this is a deck that needs some updating, but the idea behind this one was to get out tons of small tokens, and then when the time comes, you pull out Graaz and smash face. Only thing is I think I need some better, faster ways of making those tokens. Ways I currently have are cards like Mere Battlesphere, Canoptech Scarab Swarm, Genesis Chamber, and these things that make Eldrazi spawns. The other thing that's pretty cool is because this is a totally colorless deck, you get to play some colorless support like Ugin the Ineffable. Ugin is one of my favorite planeswalkers. It's him and Dak Faden. You can play Forsaken Monument and also Mystic Forge. So hopefully I can find some time to give this deck some TLC and we can make it even better. Next up is Lathiel, the Bounteous Dawn. Lathiel is a 4-mana 2/2 unicorn with lifelink, and their text box reads, at the beginning of each end step, if you gained life this turn, distribute up to that many 1/1 counters among any number of other target creatures. This is such a simple ability that is so strong, but often I avoid taking this deck out, but I am going to try and change that. The reason I haven't been taking it out is because life gain decks can have this tendency to really drag out games, but this deck is actually really strong at attacking. It's old, so it definitely needs a little bit of updating, but the main point of the deck is to play creatures and enchantments that support drawing cards and gaining life to eventually build up an insurmountable wall of large creatures and swing for the win. I think one of the main changes I'm going to make is better creatures to put those counters on, especially ones with trample. So we've got some incidental life gain to buff creatures like Courser of Crufix, a Johnny's Welcome, and Herald of the Pantheon. And because I kind of have this enchantment sub-theme in here, I leaned into it with cards like Enchantress's Presence, Mesa Enchantress, Sigil of the Empty Throne. And because I was going into these enchantments, I switched out my ramp in this deck for auras that enchant lands to make them tap for more mana, and I played cards like Voyaging Satyr. Also played Selvala, Explorer Return, because she gains us a little bit of life, and I did enchantment removal as well, like Oblivion Ring and Aura of Silence. But enough about enchantments. We've got some big life gain here as well, like Blind Obedience, Congregate is a Bomb, Unflinching Courage, Rocks Faithmender, and Titan of Industry. And to give us even more counters, we play cards like Hardened Scales, Vigor, and Per Imaginative Rascal to really bump those creatures up. This one is really fun, definitely a deck I'm going to be upgrading sooner rather than later. Now for the infamous Cruel Claw. The infamous Cruel Claw is a 3-mana 3/3 legendary creature Weasel Mercenary with Menace. Cruel Claw says, whenever the infamous Cruel Claw deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card, and you may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. So this is a deck that can very easily get overtuned, and with the way I like to play, I was trying my best to make it so that it didn't just combo into a win, but instead gave more incremental advantage and played a more fair game. And at the end of it all, it still feels pretty strong, but I feel like it needs some tweaking to be exactly where I want it. If you want more information on this deck, I do have a deck tech on it as well, so you can check that out. And if you don't want to watch the whole thing, at least watch the intro. Thought it turned out pretty well. So we've got some Voltron and attack elements like Eldrazi Conscription, so it's really huge thing that you can flip off the top. Overpowering attack is awesome. Whisper Silk Cloak. I wanted to have some big bombs to flip into, especially ones that help keep the board empty. So I'm playing stuff like Maha, it's Feathers Knight, Portal to Phyrexia, Hit the Motherlode, and Archon of Cruelty. I have a few cards that give us benefits when we cast from exile, but the one I wanted to highlight here was Wild Magic Sorcerer, which gives that card Cascade, which is pretty sweet. And then we want to scry from the top of our deck with cards like Insatiable Avarice, Palantir of Orthonk, and Vargoth Bloodsky Sire, and this will let us control better what we're flipping off the top there. So yeah, a fun, cool Rakdos deck. If you want more, go check out the full video. Next is Baeloth Bardal Entertainer, and the background is Noble Heritage. So Baeloth is a 5-mana, 2/5 legendary creature elf shaman. His first bit of text says, creatures your opponents control with power less than Baeloth power are goaded. And whenever a goaded attacking or blocking creature dies, we create a treasure token, and then we get to choose a background. Like I mentioned, I chose Noble Heritage, which is an enchantment that says, commander creatures you own have when this creature enters the battlefield, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 1/1 counters on a creature they control. For each opponent who does, gain protection from that player until your next turn. So this protection makes it so you can't be targeted, dealt damage, or enchanted by anything controlled by that player. So I have some friends who aren't huge fans of this deck, but it's probably one of my favorites, especially in Boros. I like these decks that expand what people think Boros can do. So what this deck wants to do is protect you and your commander at all costs, and build Baeloth as big as possible, causing all of your opponents to kill each other. So Noble Heritage obviously helps with that protection, and so does goading all of our creatures. But there are also some other pillow fort elements in here. And then there are also some more buffs to make Baeloth super huge so that hopefully when we do get down to that 1v1, we can eke out a win. So we've got these group slug elements like Life of the Party, Frontier Warmonger, Agitator Ant, and Vengeful Ancestor, whereas our Pillow Fort elements are Ghostly Prison, Norn's Annex, Sphere of Safety, Light Minefield, stuff like that. And then some stuff to make Baeloth big. Obviously, we're going to be using that Noble Heritage every turn, and because we're placing out all these enchantments to protect us, and we are going to get a few incidental treasures off of Baeloth's ability, I like to play all the glitters and ethereal armor to really boost up his power. And then for protection, we've got stuff like Robe of Stars and Swiftfoot Boots. And now we've finally made it to my final deck. This is the most powerful deck in my arsenal. I've spent years crafting it and honing it in to be the perfect turn 0 win every single time. Jokes. My last deck is Alexander Clamilton. Alexander Clamilton is a 3-mana 0/4 Clamfolk Advisor Rebel. That's right, Clamfolk. And he says, whenever you cast a wordy spell, scry 2. A spell is wordy if it has 4 or more lines of rules text. The second part of his ability says you can pay 1 in a red, tap him, and then choose target creature you don't control. Reveal the top card of your library, and Alexander Clamilton gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of lines of rules text of the revealed card. Alexander Clamilton then fights that creature. So all jokes aside, this deck is nothing to scoff at. The point is primarily to play wordy spells as prescribed by the commander, but then I have kind of a complicated plan of trying to use the ability before combat, untap him, and then attack for a stupid amount, and then make people feel really sad they lost to my meme deck. Once again, I definitely could make this deck better. One of the main things I'll need to get is things that prevent him from taking damage when you have to fight that creature, but usually you can just choose something small. So we want to play cards with the most lines of text possible, and pretty well the best card hard bang for your buck is the full text lands. I think these have something like 24 lines of text. There's also the full text planeswalkers, so I get that Dak Faded in there, hell yeah. And then we need some untappers like Crypsis, Sting, the Glinting Dagger, Vizier of the Tumbling Sands, and Staff of Domination. We've got a few equipment in here for them like Commander's Plate, Reaver Cleaver, Fiend Lash, and then we want some cards that let us see the top card of our library like Future Sight and Magus of the Future. And when you do pull this off, you will leave your opponents laughing and crying. Oh my gosh, guys, we did it. 25 up, 25 down. I think I am gonna end up uploading this as one big video, so I hope you guys enjoyed in that way. It took me forever to record this, so I really hope you like it. Please let me know down in the comments if there's any of these that you would want a full deck tech for. Once again, my Architect will be down in the comments. I am also gonna link to the Architect page that I used for this video, but please leave a like down below. If you're new here, once again, please subscribe, hit that bell. I'd love for you to stick around here as our channel continues to grow. I want to thank everyone again who's joined me on this journey here, who's been liking the videos, who enjoys the content. Thank you so much. Until next time, I have been Commander in General, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.